Anxiety is like a signal light flashing in the middle of a storm. It demands attention, but too often we react without a plan, and the signal escalates into chaos. Today, you are going to learn not to suppress it, not to fight it, but to intercept it before it grows out of control. In the next few minutes, you will discover 3 strategies that, when applied consistently, can slow anxiety down, reduce its intensity, and give you the sense of agency you have been searching for. This is not about eliminating uncertainty. That is impossible. It is about reshaping the way your mind responds to uncertainty. The first strategy targets the initial spike of anxiety, the moment when the heart rate rises and the mind starts racing. Most people interpret these early signals as danger, and the system kicks into overdrive. The key is early intervention. The brain's threat circuits respond to novelty and unpredictability. When you notice the first signs, slight tension in the chest, rapid thoughts, shallow breathing, instead of fighting them or trying to reason them away, engage your attention fully in a controlled, tangible action. For example, take a single object in your environment, a pen, a cup, or even your own hands, and explore it with precision. Focus on its texture, weight, temperature, edges, and minute details. This anchors your attention in the present, redirecting computational resources away from abstract threat simulations. While this may sound simple, it is profoundly effective because your nervous system cannot simultaneously process detailed sensory input and catastrophic future predictions at the same intensity. This is not distraction, it is cognitive redirection. By narrowing your attentional bandwidth, you reduce the fuel that feeds the anxiety system. The first 60 to 90 seconds of deliberate focus often result in measurable physical changes, slower heart rate, deeper breathing, and a gradual sense of mental clarity. Do not check if it is working. Observation of efficacy can reactivate threat circuits. Stay with the process, and your body will signal safety, not alarm. The second strategy works with internal dialogue, which is one of the primary amplifiers of anxiety. Your mind tends to generate what-if loops. What if this goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I cannot cope? Each loop strengthens the system's belief that immediate action is required. To intervene, apply what can be called temporal distancing. Instead of asking, "What if this happens?" ask, "Will this matter in a month, in a year?" Projecting the scenario into a larger time frame immediately reduces emotional intensity. You are signaling to the nervous system that the current spike is not existential, it is transient. Anxiety thrives on urgency and immediacy. By reframing time, you disrupt the amplification process. Temporal distancing can be enhanced by visualization. Imagine explaining the situation to a future version of yourself, 5 or 10 years ahead. Picture that version analyzing the current worry with perspective and experience. Would they see this as catastrophic or as a challenge that passed? Your brain begins to recruit networks associated with long-term memory and analytical reasoning instead of immediate threat detection. Emotional intensity diminishes because the system recognizes continuity and resilience in your past experiences. The third strategy involves physical regulation. Anxiety does not exist purely in the mind. It manifests in the body. Shallow, rapid breathing, muscle tension, and heart rate acceleration feed back to the brain, signaling continued threat. Controlling one element of this feedback loop, typically respiration, can have immediate effects. Focus on slightly lengthening the exhale. You do not need deep, forced breaths. Just extend the exhalation so that it is slightly longer than the inhalation. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, promoting calm and signaling to the brain that the environment is safe enough to reduce threat responses. Simultaneously, you can employ micro-movements to reinforce safety. Slow, deliberate movements, lifting a cup, placing an object, walking a few steps, create a physical rhythm that communicates to the nervous system. The body is functional, safe, and not under immediate threat. These small controlled actions do not erase the anxious state, but they provide structured sensory input that competes with the chaotic internal predictions, effectively lowering intensity. These 3 strategies, attentional anchoring, temporal distancing, and physical regulation, interact synergistically. Applying one is beneficial. Applying all three is transformative. Attentional anchoring slows the surge of cognitive predictions. Temporal distancing reframes perceived urgency. Physical regulation reduces the feedback loop from body to brain. Together, they intercept anxiety before it escalates into a full-blown episode. There is also a meta layer to consider. Most people attempt to manage anxiety reactively, responding only after it has fully activated. This trains the system to expect alarm signals and reinforces sensitivity. By applying these strategies preemptively, at the earliest signs of internal agitation, you recalibrate your nervous system's baseline responsiveness. Each small intervention strengthens regulatory circuits. Over time, the brain requires less external input to stabilize. Recovery becomes faster, intensity lower, and your sense of control higher. Notice how each strategy relies on precision and presence. Precision constrains the system's runaway predictions. Presence signals safety and control. Anxiety depends on diffuse attention and abstract forecasting. By replacing diffuse prediction with specific sensory input, temporal perspective, and regulated physical state, you convert a reactive system into an operative one. You are no longer a passenger in your mind. You are learning to operate its circuits. Another subtle but crucial point is the labeling of thoughts. When anxious thoughts arise, silently categorize them. Prediction, memory, anticipation. This is not judgment, but cognitive tagging. Labeling interrupts automatic escalation by engaging the prefrontal cortex, the executive center responsible for regulation. Each labeled thought becomes an event rather than a command, reducing the compulsive drive to react. Over time, this practice rewires default responses, creating a buffer between perception and reaction. If you feel the tension within you already easing, even slightly, acknowledge it. That acknowledgement is not trivial. It reinforces agency. Your nervous system interprets conscious recognition of control as evidence that threat need not escalate. And if this approach resonates with you, take a moment to internalize it. The next time anxiety arises, you have a set of tools ready to employ before the surge overtakes you. Writing it down, mentally or physically, strengthens this neural preparation. Stay with this awareness, because mastery is cumulative. Practicing these strategies consistently, even in moments of mild agitation, fortifies the circuits that regulate emotion. Like any high-functioning system, practice in non-critical conditions ensures performance under stress. The more you rehearse attentive focus, temporal scaling, and physical regulation, the more automatic these responses become. Anxiety remains possible, but it becomes manageable, less dominating, less convincing, less urgent. Right now, take a moment to notice how your body feels. The heart rate, muscle tension, and breathing pattern. Compare it, silently, to the moments before you applied the strategies. Even subtle reductions in intensity are significant. They are the first measurable outputs of a system beginning to recalibrate. This is not theoretical. It is operational, tangible evidence that the internal environment can be modified at will. You are not learning to eliminate anxiety. You are learning to interact with it intelligently. You are training predictive and reactive circuits to work together rather than against each other. Over time, this skill develops resilience, reduces unnecessary cognitive load, and creates a buffer between perception and reaction. The mind is powerful when it serves you rather than controlling you. Finally, internalize this truth. Anxiety does not define capability. Activation does not equal incapacity. When you intercept it early, you teach your nervous system that the signal is informative, not commanding. Each successful application of these strategies is a proof point. You can operate while anxiety is present. And that proof, repeated and internalized, transforms how future episodes arise and resolve. If this perspective is clarifying, make a mental note or write it down. I can engage before escalation. That phrase is not motivational fluff. It is a neural anchor, a commitment to practice, a reminder that control is not external. It is learned within. And with repeated application, your nervous system will begin to reflect that learning naturally. Anxiety often feels like it is a permanent state, as if the mind has been trapped in an endless loop. But that perception is an illusion. What you are experiencing is a highly sensitive system reacting to perceived threats, and every reaction is temporary if addressed strategically. The next step is understanding how to prevent escalation, not only in the moment, but in the minutes leading up to it, because anticipation is often more powerful than the event itself. Many people experience anxiety before an expected challenge, and it grows simply because the brain rehearses possible failures. The strategies we are exploring intercept these patterns before they solidify. The first preventive principle is environmental calibration. Your nervous system is highly responsive to sensory inputs, sights, sounds, temperature, lighting, and even social cues. Before a situation you anticipate might trigger anxiety, intentionally adjust your environment to reduce uncertainty and increase predictability. This could be as simple as organizing your workspace, ensuring a clear path for movement, or controlling lighting and noise levels. Predictability communicates safety to your system. Even small adjustments before entering a potentially stressful scenario can dramatically reduce baseline arousal and prevent the spike of anxiety from reaching a tipping point. Second, prepare cognitive scripts. When anxiety arises, the brain often jumps to reactive responses, which are usually unhelpful or automatic. By developing mental scripts, concise, rehearsed statements, you provide the mind with a template to respond instead of reacting impulsively. Examples include, "I can handle this one step at a time," or "This sensation is temporary and I have the tools to manage it." Practice these scripts during low-stress periods so they are easily accessible under pressure. The nervous system will recognize these prepared responses as safe protocols, reducing the tendency to escalate. Another preventive measure is micro-exposure combined with strategic focus. If you know a certain task or situation triggers early signs of anxiety, approach it incrementally with focused attention, similar to the attentional anchoring strategy. The key difference is that this is preemptive. You are exposing your nervous system to the trigger in a controlled way, strengthening regulatory responses before full anxiety manifests. For example, if public speaking provokes anxiety, begin by speaking aloud to yourself for a few minutes, gradually increasing duration and focusing on sensory details of your environment and voice. Each controlled exposure updates the brain's prediction models, showing that activation does not necessitate crisis. Timing and pacing are essential. Anxiety often escalates when your cognitive system feels rushed or overloaded. Break tasks into discrete, achievable segments. Begin with a single, clearly defined action. Avoid multitasking or attempting to solve everything at once. By providing the nervous system with structured, manageable input, you prevent it from defaulting to high alert mode. The perception of control is critical, not just logically but neurologically. When the brain recognizes that manageable steps exist, the intensity of the anxiety signal decreases naturally. Breathing remains a powerful tool in preemptive regulation. A subtle, intentional adjustment of respiration can prevent early arousal from snowballing. Focus on extending the exhale slightly longer than the inhale, maintaining a relaxed rhythm. Even minor adjustments signal safety to the parasympathetic nervous system, inhibiting unnecessary sympathetic activation. Pair this with micro-movements, slow, controlled gestures, to further reinforce the message that your body and environment are stable and manageable. These small, deliberate acts communicate structure and control, reducing anticipatory escalation. Visualization enhances preemptive control. Imagine approaching a challenging situation with calm, precise attention and deliberate action. Picture yourself implementing attentional focus, temporal distancing, and regulated respiration simultaneously. This mental rehearsal is not fantasy, it is system training. The brain cannot reliably distinguish between vividly rehearsed experience and actual occurrence in terms of neural preparation. By visualizing successful engagement before anxiety appears, you precondition regulatory circuits, reducing the intensity of the real experience. Integration of sensory, cognitive, and physiological strategies is key. Each component, attentional anchoring, temporal distancing, micro-exposure, controlled movement, and respiratory modulation, addresses a different aspect of the nervous system. Applied in combination before an anxiety trigger, they create a layered buffer, reducing the likelihood of escalation. The mind and body are trained to anticipate stability, not crisis. Repetition strengthens this buffer, making the response increasingly automatic over time. Another subtle but critical element is mental framing. Anticipatory anxiety often arises from uncertainty or fear of evaluation. Instead of framing the upcoming event as a threat, reframe it as a data-gathering or learning experience. The cognitive shift from "I must perform perfectly" to "I am observing and engaging" reduces pressure and reorients the nervous system from survival mode to operational mode. This is a shift from reactive to proactive cognition, giving the system a sense of agency and reducing the perceived magnitude of the threat. Reflect on the role of self-talk during anticipation. Most people respond to early anxiety with judgment or criticism. "I shouldn't feel this," or "I'll never handle this." These statements amplify threat signals. Replace judgmental self-talk with observational statements. "I notice this sensation," or "My system is preparing for challenge." Observation without judgment reduces the feedback loop that intensifies anticipatory anxiety. The act of noticing becomes a form of regulation, signaling that the system is understood and contained rather than out of control. Consistency is foundational. Preemptive strategies are not one-off fixes, they are training protocols. The nervous system updates its response patterns based on repeated experience. Frequent application, even in minor challenges or low-intensity anxiety states, reinforces neural pathways associated with regulation. Over time, anticipatory spikes become less intense, shorter, and more manageable. You are constructing resilience through deliberate practice, not waiting for external circumstances to change. Finally, recognize that mastery is cumulative. Each small application of attentional focus, temporal rescaling, controlled respiration, micro-movements, and cognitive framing contributes to a broader adaptive architecture. Anxiety no longer dominates because the system has been recalibrated to handle activation efficiently. You are not erasing uncertainty. You are training your mind to respond to it intelligently, predictably, and with agency. The difference between reacting uncontrollably and operating calmly may seem subtle at first, but it compounds profoundly over time. Pause for a moment and observe your current state. Even as you read these words, notice your breathing, posture, and mental tone. Recognize the capacity to intervene early. The awareness alone is powerful. It is the first layer of anticipatory control. And if this perspective resonates, commit mentally to applying at least one strategy in the coming day. Make it concrete. Notice the first physical or mental sign of anxiety and run a preemptive response. This simple practice creates new neural pathways, rewiring your system for earlier, more effective regulation. These strategies, when combined and applied before anxiety escalates, transform how the nervous system interacts with anticipated challenges. Over time, anticipation itself becomes a tool, a signal for intervention, rather than a trigger for escalation. You are no longer merely reacting to anxiety. You are orchestrating the internal conditions that determine its intensity. By intercepting activation early, you convert potential overwhelm into actionable insight, and in doing so, reclaim authority over your own mind and body. Once you begin applying these preemptive strategies consistently, something subtle but profound starts to happen. The nervous system begins to recalibrate its expectations. It no longer anticipates every small stressor as a catastrophic event. Each successful intervention becomes evidence that the system can tolerate activation without losing control. This evidence accumulates, updating the predictive models your brain uses to determine threat levels. The more often you catch anxiety early and redirect it, the less frequent and less intense future spikes become. A key insight is that your mind does not distinguish between internal and external signals in the early stages of anxiety. A racing thought, a tight muscle, or a slight increase in heart rate can all be interpreted as a signal of danger. This explains why anxiety can escalate in the absence of immediate external threats. The strategies you are practicing work by giving the brain alternative interpretations of these internal signals. Attentional anchoring, Temporal perspective and physical regulation provide concrete evidence that the situation is manageable. They interrupt the automatic threat interpretation before it gains momentum. Integration is essential. Using these strategies in isolation can be effective, but combining them creates a synergistic effect. For instance, while focusing on a tactile object, you can also lengthen your exhale, label intrusive thoughts, and imagine how a future version of yourself would perceive the current challenge. Each layer reinforces the others. The system receives multiple simultaneous signals of safety, control, and temporal distance. This multi-layered approach is why preemptive application is so powerful. It engages different neural networks simultaneously, maximizing the likelihood of preventing escalation. The concept of practice under low-intensity conditions cannot be overstated. Like any skill, the regulatory circuits of the brain strengthen most effectively when they are exercised regularly in controlled environments. You are training the system to respond predictably to early cues. Over time, this leads to automaticity. The nervous system begins to implement these strategies without conscious effort, reducing cognitive load and freeing mental resources for focus, creativity, and problem-solving. Anxiety becomes a signal to engage learned strategies rather than a force that hijacks attention and action. Another crucial element is the reframing of failure. Anxiety often primes the brain to perceive minor missteps as catastrophic. By consistently applying preemptive strategies, you teach the brain that errors or uncertainties are not existential threats. Each small success, noticing early signs, implementing a strategy, observing reduced intensity, strengthens the neural pathways associated with resilience. This builds confidence in the system's ability to manage activation, which itself reduces the likelihood of future spikes. Consider also the role of self-compassion in preemptive anxiety management. When you notice early signs of agitation, respond with curiosity rather than judgment. Thoughts like, "I am anxious again," can escalate internal tension. Replace them with observational statements. "I notice early activation. I can apply my strategies." This subtle shift removes the layer of meta-anxiety, anxiety about being anxious, which often amplifies the initial signal. The nervous system interprets compassion as safety, further reducing escalation. Micro-exposure, when combined with preemptive strategies, offers additional benefits. Intentionally engaging with low-intensity triggers while employing attentional, temporal, and physical interventions strengthens tolerance. Each exposure serves as a controlled rehearsal, confirming that activation can occur without overwhelming the system. Over time, these experiences generalize, reducing sensitivity to future stressors that previously would have elicited disproportionate responses. Another layer to consider is cognitive load management. The brain's predictive system becomes more reactive under high cognitive load, when attention is divided or working memory is taxed. Preemptively managing attention, focusing on a single task, and applying temporal distancing reduces cognitive load at critical moments. This reduction decreases the likelihood that early signs of anxiety will spiral into full-blown episodes. It is not avoidance. It is intelligent allocation of mental resources. As these strategies are applied repeatedly, the nervous system recalibrates baseline thresholds. Signals that once triggered full activation now prompt only mild arousal. The system becomes more discriminating, responding proportionally rather than reflexively. This does not mean anxiety disappears, it is a normal adaptive response. But its intensity and duration become manageable, and it no longer dominates behavior or perception. At this stage, integration of awareness is critical. Observe early signs, not with panic, but with curiosity. Notice subtle physical cues, a tensing muscle, a quickened heartbeat, a racing thought. Each observation is an opportunity to apply the preemptive strategies before escalation. This turns anxiety into an instructive signal, a guide for action rather than a force of disruption. The final insight is that preemptive intervention cultivates a new relationship with your mind. Anxiety is no longer an external tyrant dictating behavior. It becomes an internal signal that can be interpreted, managed, and redirected. You shift from reaction to operation, from being carried by the system to piloting it. This is the essence of agency, the recognition that you can influence internal processes before they dominate perception and behavior. As you continue to practice these strategies, notice how small shifts compound over time. Early interventions reduce intensity, which reduces secondary tension, which in turn reduces the likelihood of further escalation. You are creating a positive feedback loop, not of suppression but of regulation. Each success reinforces the system's capacity to handle activation adaptively. Finally, reflect on the significance of consistent application. The nervous system learns through repetition. Each moment you apply attentional focus, temporal scaling, physical regulation, and compassionate observation reinforces neural pathways that prioritize calm, control, and resilience. This is how preemptive strategies transform reactive anxiety into manageable activation. You are not avoiding the experience, Gush, you are mastering it. As you continue along this path of preemptive regulation, it becomes clear that anxiety is not an enemy to be defeated, but a signal to be interpreted. Early signs, increased heart rate, shallow breathing, scattered attention, are not indications that something is wrong beyond repair. They are notifications from your nervous system that it is mobilizing resources. By responding strategically, you transform these notifications into opportunities for control rather than triggers for escalation. This is a critical distinction. Anxiety loses its authority not when it disappears, but when it is no longer automatically obeyed. The nervous system is constantly predicting outcomes, and those predictions drive much of the physical and emotional experience of anxiety. Every micro-intervention you make, focusing attention on a single object, extending the exhale, labeling intrusive thoughts, or projecting scenarios into the future, provides corrective data to the predictive model. Your system learns. Not every signal requires full activation. Not every thought demands a reaction. Over time, this recalibration reduces baseline hyperarousal and strengthens the sense of safety in daily experience. It is also essential to integrate the concept of controlled exposure into your practice. Preemptive strategies are most effective when paired with gradual engagement with known triggers. For instance, if social situations provoke anticipatory anxiety, begin with low-intensity exposure, applying attentional and physiological strategies in controlled increments. Each successful encounter provides feedback to the nervous system, reinforcing that activation does not equal incapacity. This cumulative learning reduces sensitivity and prevents minor spikes from escalating unnecessarily. Timing and pacing continue to be critical. Anxiety often escalates when your cognitive resources are overextended or when tasks appear overwhelming. Structuring the day into discrete, manageable actions reduces cognitive load and prevents the system from defaulting to a high alert state. The nervous system thrives on predictability and discernible progress. Breaking tasks into clear, achievable steps signals that control exists, mitigating the perception of urgency that fuels anxiety. Micro-movements remain a powerful adjunct to these cognitive strategies. Simple, deliberate actions, adjusting posture, moving an object, walking slowly, provide tactile feedback to the nervous system that the environment is safe and controllable. These actions communicate structure to the body, which in turn communicates safety to the brain. The feedback loop between body and mind is central to preemptive anxiety management. Physical regulation supports cognitive regulation and vice versa. Visualization strengthens anticipatory control further. Imagine yourself entering a situation that might typically provoke anxiety, and picture yourself implementing these strategies seamlessly. Focused attention, temporal reframing, controlled breathing, and deliberate movement. The nervous system cannot easily differentiate between vivid rehearsal and actual experience. Mental rehearsal programs neural circuits to respond adaptively, reducing the intensity of real-life anticipatory spikes. Repeated rehearsal cultivates automaticity and confidence. Cognitive framing is equally important. Anticipatory anxiety often arises from a distorted perception of threat magnitude. By reframing potential challenges as data-gathering exercises or opportunities for learning, you reduce the emotional charge of uncertainty. The nervous system interprets cognitive framing as a signal of control rather than threat. This shift from reactive to proactive cognition allows early interventions to succeed more consistently, preventing escalation into high-intensity states. Self-talk during anticipatory moments must be considered carefully. Judgmental or critical internal dialogue, "I shouldn't feel this, I'll fail," amplifies threat signals and escalates anxiety. Replacing judgment with observation, "I notice early activation and I can apply my strategies," neutralizes the meta-anxiety loop. Observation provides feedback to the nervous system that the internal environment is safe, enabling regulation to proceed effectively. Consistency transforms these practices from isolated interventions into a system of preemptive resilience. Applying these strategies during low-intensity moments strengthens the circuits responsible for regulation, making automatic deployment more likely under high-intensity conditions. Neural plasticity supports this learning. The more the system experiences successful interventions, the more naturally it applies them when needed. Gradually, anticipatory spikes diminish in intensity and duration, and the nervous system operates with greater efficiency. It is also crucial to acknowledge that failure or partial application is not a setback. The nervous system is dynamic and resilient. Even when a spike progresses further than intended, returning to these strategies reinforces regulatory circuits. The key is repeated engagement, not perfection. Each interaction, successful or partially effective, is data for the brain. Regulation is possible and activation can be managed. Another subtle layer involves mental identity. Individuals who internalize the label anxious often perceive early spikes as evidence of incapacity. Reframing identity as someone learning to operate and regulate the mind shifts predictive expectations. The nervous system begins to anticipate competence rather than overwhelm, further reducing the likelihood of early escalation. Identity beliefs shape neural pathways. Adopting an operational identity creates pathways that favor regulation and resilience. The integration of attentional anchoring, temporal perspective, controlled respiration, micro-movement, visualization, cognitive framing, and compassionate self-observation creates a multidimensional buffer against anticipatory anxiety. Each dimension addresses different aspects of the system: sensory, cognitive, physiological, and emotional. Together, they prevent escalation more effectively than isolated interventions. The synergy of these layers reinforces the nervous system's capacity for early regulation, reducing the need for reactive control. As you implement these strategies, observe the compounding effects. Early intervention prevents minor spikes from becoming major episodes. Reduced intensity lowers secondary tension in muscles and heart rate. Improved control reduces anticipatory worry about future activation. The feedback loop becomes increasingly positive. Regulation strengthens, baseline arousal decreases, and perceived agency increases. Over time, anticipatory anxiety shifts from an uncontrollable surge to a manageable signal, an opportunity to apply learned strategies. Finally, internalize the principle of agency. The first sign of nervous system activation is not a command to panic. It is a cue to operate. By recognizing early signs and applying preemptive strategies, you create a new pattern. Anxiety becomes informative rather than commanding. This transforms the internal experience of potential stress, turning automatic escalation into a controlled, measurable process. Each application builds resilience, strengthens regulatory pathways, and reinforces the understanding that activation does not equal incapacity. Commit to observing, applying, and reflecting on these strategies daily. Even brief, consistent application rewires the predictive models of the nervous system. Over time, you will notice that early signs of anxiety elicit less intensity, require less intervention, and resolve more quickly. The system begins to anticipate competence and calm rather than threat and panic. This is the essence of preemptive control. The nervous system is trained to respond before escalation, giving you authority over your internal experience rather than leaving you at its mercy.